And just like that, the past came rushing back. Marcus Reed. The name hit them harder than any explosion they had ever survived. For a moment, no one spoke. The five men stared at the boy as if they were seeing a ghost. Marcus had been one of them, one of the best, calm under pressure, fearless in chaos, the kind of man who ran toward danger while others ran away. And he had been gone for 8 years. The SEAL who had knelt down felt his throat tighten. That's not possible, he whispered, more to himself than to the boy. Marcus had never talked about having a child. But then again, Marcus hadn't talked much about his personal life at all. The boy reached into his small backpack and pulled out something carefully wrapped in a cloth. His hands were steady. "My mom gave me this," he said. He unfolded the cloth to reveal an old military coin, scratched and worn with age. On one side was the same elite team symbol. On the other side were 5 initials carved deeply into the metal. The 5 men froze. Those were their initials. They had given that coin to Marcus the night before his final mission, a private tradition, a promise that no matter what happened, they were brothers. One of the men stepped back, shaking his head. "We buried him," he said quietly. "We stood at his funeral." The boy looked confused. "My mom said he saved people. She said he was a hero." "He was," another SEAL replied instantly, his voice firm. "He absolutely was." Images flooded their minds. Marcus kicking open doors, pulling teammates out of danger, laughing around a fire after missions. And then the final mission, the one that had gone wrong. The one where Marcus stayed behind to make sure the others escaped safely. They had lived because of him. The kneeling SEAL took a deep breath. "Where is your mother, son?" "She passed away last year," the boy answered softly. "Before she died, she told me to find you. She said if I ever saw that tattoo, I should tell you my father's name." The room felt smaller. The men who had faced enemy fire without flinching now struggled to steady their breathing. Marcus hadn't just saved their lives. He had left behind a family. One of the SEALs slowly rolled up his sleeve, revealing the full tattoo, the trident wrapped in rope, just like the boy had recognized. Beneath it was a date, the same date Marcus had gotten his. "We didn't know," the tallest SEAL said, his voice heavy with regret. "He never told us." The boy looked at them with innocent curiosity. "Were you his friends?" The question broke something inside them. "Yes," the kneeling man answered, placing a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "We were his brothers." Silence filled the room again, but this time it wasn't shock. It was understanding. Marcus had once carried them out of danger. Now, standing before them, was the living proof of the life he had protected. The 5 men exchanged a look, the same silent communication they had used in combat for years. No words were needed. One of them cleared his throat. "Son, you're not alone anymore." The boy blinked. "I'm not." The SEAL shook his head firmly. "Not anymore." And in that moment, the brothers Marcus had once saved silently made a new mission. This time, it wasn't about war. It was about family. Until now, the memory of that funeral still lived in their bones. Gray skies, folded flags, the sound of boots against wet ground. They remembered standing in perfect formation, their faces stone still while their hearts felt like they were breaking apart. Marcus's coffin had been draped in the American flag, carried with honor. The salute, the gunshots, the bugle playing softly in the distance. They had faced gunfire without fear. But that day, they struggled just to breathe. They remembered his wife, Alana. She stood strong, even as grief tried to pull her to the ground. She had held their hands one by one, thanking them for standing beside Marcus. "He loved you like brothers," she had said through trembling lips. Not once did she mention a child, and none of them thought to ask. After the burial, life moved forward the only way it knew how. The team disbanded over time. Some retired. Some trained new recruits. They kept in touch, but something was always missing. A chair at gatherings that stayed empty. A laugh that never echoed again. Marcus had been the center of their storm. Steady, dependable, unshakable. They told stories about him often. How he once carried a wounded teammate for miles without stopping. How he gave up his own leave time so another SEAL could see his newborn daughter. How he used to say, "No one gets left behind. Not on my watch." They had believed that. Until the mission overseas 5 years ago. It was supposed to be a quick rescue. Extract hostages. In and out. Clean. But intelligence had been wrong. The explosion hit before they even reached the building. Dust and debris filled the air. Gunfire rained down from rooftops. Communications failed. Visibility dropped to nothing. In the chaos, one of the men had been trapped under fallen concrete. Another had taken shrapnel to the leg. Marcus didn't hesitate. While others covered fire, he ran back. Not once. Not twice. 3 times he went into that collapsing structure. He pulled one teammate out, then another, then the last. By the time the evacuation helicopter arrived, Marcus was still inside, laying down cover fire so the others could escape. They shouted for him. They begged him over the comms. But all they heard was his steady voice. Go. I've got you covered. Then silence. The military called it heroic. The news called it sacrifice. But to these 5 men, it was the day they lost a piece of themselves. And now, standing in front of them was a small boy with Marcus's eyes. Marcus's quiet strength. Marcus's courage. The realization hit them all at once. He hadn't just saved them that day. He had left behind a legacy. One of the SEALs swallowed hard, looking at the boy more carefully now, at the familiar shape of his jaw, the calm way he stood without fear. How old are you, son? One of them asked softly. 8, the boy replied. 8. That meant he'd been only 3 when Marcus died. Old enough to remember a face. Too young to understand why it never came back. The men exchanged heavy glances. They had stood at Marcus's grave believing they were saying goodbye to everything he left behind. But they were wrong. Because now, after years of silence, of buried grief and unanswered questions, Marcus's son was standing right in front of them. And this time, they weren't going to miss what mattered most. For a long moment, no one in the diner moved. The hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. The faint clink of dishes from a kitchen. The smell of coffee in the air. Everything felt distant. All 5 men stared at the photograph in the boy's small hands. Marcus was smiling at it. That same wide, confident grin they remembered so well. His arm was wrapped securely around a toddler, holding him high against his chest. His sleeve was rolled up just enough to reveal the trident tattoo wrapped in rope, and the date beneath it. The same date inked on their own arms. The toddler in the photo had tiny hands gripping Marcus's shirt, his face pressed close to his father's shoulder. That toddler was now standing in front of them, alive, brave, steady. One of the SEALs exhaled shakily and pulled out a chair. You should sit down, son. The boy obeyed quietly, climbing into the booth like he belonged there, like he had always belonged there. How did your mom know about this place? Another man asked gently, sliding the photo back to him with careful hands. The boy shrugged a little. Dad told her. She said he didn't talk about missions, but he talked about you guys. He called you his brothers. The word hit them hard. Brothers. They had used that word too, but hearing it from Marcus's son made it heavier. Real. She said every year, around this time, you meet here, the boy continued. Same booth. Same order. She said if I ever felt ready, I could come. One of the men let out a soft, broken laugh. Same order, huh? Pancakes. Black coffee. No syrup for one of you, the boy said, pointing shyly at the tallest SEAL. The man's eyes widened. Marcus used to tease him for that. They hadn't told anyone about that tradition. Not their co-workers. Not even their families. After Marcus died, they made a promise to meet once a year. No uniforms. No speeches. Just 5 men remembering their 6th. They never posted photos. Never checked it online. It was private. Sacred. And yet somehow, Marcus had prepared for this moment. As if he knew. The SEAL who at first knelt beside the boy leaned forward slightly. What's your name, son? Eli. Vi ansvaret. Eli. The man repeated slowly, as if locking it into memory. Did your mom ever bring you before? Another asked carefully. Eli shook his head. She said I was too young. She wanted me to understand first. She said you weren't just soldiers, you were family. Silence fell again, but this time it wasn't filled with shock. It was filled with something else. Responsibility. One of the men reached into his wallet and pulled out a worn photograph of his own. 6 men standing shoulder to shoulder, arms linked, dirt on their faces, smiling like nothing in the world could break them. He placed it on the table in front of Eli. "That's your dad," he said softly. "Right there in the middle." Eli leaned closer, studying it carefully. His small finger touched Marcus's image gently. "He looks happy," he whispered. "He was," another seal replied, "especially when he talked about you." Eli looked up quickly. "He talked about me?" "All the time," the kneeling man said without hesitation. "He carried your picture in his vest." It was true. They remembered it now. A small, folded photo tucked behind his armor. The same photo Eli had just shown them. One of the men swallowed hard. "Your dad saved our lives." Eli didn't look surprised. "My mom said he would do that," he answered simply. The 5 men exchanged a look, the same silent understanding they once shared in combat. Marcus hadn't just made sure his son could find them. He had trusted them to step up, to protect, to guide, to be there. The tallest seal finally straightened his shoulders. "Well," he said gently, looking at Eli, "looks like we've got a new tradition." "Eli Tlinket." "What kind?" The man's voice was steady now. "Making sure Marcus's son never has to wonder who his father was." And for the first time since walking into that diner, Eli smiled. Not a small, nervous smile, but one that looked just like Marcus's. The room felt warm now, despite the hum of the diner's neon lights and the faint smell of coffee in the air. The 5 men leaned closer, their faces softer than they had been in years, as if the weight of missions, explosions, and loss had been replaced, for this moment, by connection. The tallest seal's voice was steady but quiet. "Your father was the bravest man I ever knew." Eli, the boy, tilted his head, listening intently. His small hands clutched the edge of the booth as he tried to take in the weight of those words. They began to tell him stories he had never heard, stories his mother had hinted at but never shared in detail. How Marcus once carried a teammate for miles through mud and rubble, refusing to stop until his comrade was safe. How he had shared his last bottle of water with another, even when he himself was parched. How he would whisper to the team about his son and show off Eli's pictures whenever he could. One of the seals smiled, a soft, almost boyish grin that hadn't surfaced in years. "He showed us your pictures all the time. Said you were stronger than all of us." Eli's eyes began to glisten. I don't remember him much," he said, his voice trembling. "Just his laugh." Hearing that, the men felt a tightness in their chests. These were men trained to face bullets, fire, and the chaos of war. They were taught to suppress fear, to control grief. But this was different. This wasn't a mission. This was family. The youngest seal leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. His eyes softened as he spoke. "Your father saved my life," he admitted. "Every day I wake up, it's because of him." Eli's small face looked up at each of them, searching. Did he ever say he was scared? The men exchanged glances, sharing a silent understanding that didn't need words. One of them nodded slowly. "He said he was scared of one thing," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "What?" Eli asked, his voice small, curious, tentative. "Not being there to see you grow up," the man answered. For a moment, silence filled the booth. It wasn't the suffocating, heavy silence of loss. It wasn't the silence of danger looming on a battlefield. This silence was different. It carried meaning. It carried love. It carried the unspoken bond between a father, his child, and the men he trusted like brothers. Eli's eyes shimmered, and the corners of his mouth lifted in a tiny smile. The 5 men looked at each other, feeling a mixture of pride, sorrow, and relief. They had carried him in their hearts for years without realizing it. And now, Marcus's legacy had returned, alive and present, in the form of his son. The youngest seal reached over, gently resting a hand on Eli's shoulder. "We're here now, kid, and we'll make sure you know every piece of your dad. Every story, every laugh, every lesson." Eli nodded solemnly, the beginnings of trust and understanding settling into his small frame. For the first time, he didn't feel like a boy lost to the past. He felt like he belonged. The tallest seal looked down at him with a quiet determination. "We'll take care of you, just like he would have." And in that moment, the booth wasn't just a place to sit. It was a home, a circle, a promise. A new chapter had begun, one built not on missions or medals, but on love, memory, and family. Before leaving that diner, Eli reached into his backpack one last time. His little fingers fumbled for a moment, then carefully pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He held it out with a shy smile. "It's a drawing," he said softly, almost afraid they wouldn't understand. The 5 men leaned closer. The paper was simple, 6 stick figures drawn with a child's innocence. 5 tall figures, standing shoulder to shoulder, and 1 smaller figure in the middle with a tiny circle for a head and spindly arms reaching up. "That's us," Eli whispered, pointing to the small figure in the middle. One of the seals, the youngest, took the drawing from him as if it were made of gold. His hands were steady, but his eyes glistened. "You know something, kid?" he said, his voice low but filled with warmth. "From now on, you don't just have your dad's memory." Eli blinked up at him. "You have us," the seal added, and the other 4 men nodded in unison, their faces soft but resolute. It wasn't a dramatic promise. There were no grand gestures or loud proclamations. But the sincerity in their eyes, the unspoken vow, carried more weight than any medal or mission ever could. In the months that followed, they honored that promise. They showed up at Eli's basketball games, cheering the loudest in the stands. They helped him with school projects from science fair volcanoes to history presentations. They taught him how to tie knots, the way Marcus had taught them, passing on the small lessons that made ordinary things extraordinary. They were careful not to replace his father, but they became steady anchors in his life, constant, patient, and dependable. On his 10th birthday, they planned something special. Eli's eyes widened when they handed him a small box, wrapped carefully in blue paper. Inside was a delicate necklace, simple but meaningful. It bore the same trident symbol Marcus had tattooed on his arm, redesigned smaller to fit around Eli's neck. On the back of the pendant, etched in tiny letters, were words that carried the weight of everything they had learned and felt. Legacy never dies. When Eli held it in his hands, he didn't feel like a boy without a father anymore. He felt like he had gained 5 more, 5 protectors, mentors, and friends who would never leave his side. He felt seen, loved, safe. The 5 men watched him laugh that day, their hearts unexpectedly light, the kind of laughter only true family can inspire. And as they exchanged glances, they realized something profound. Marcus Reed had never truly left them. Not his team, not his family. He had saved their lives once in the chaos of battle. But through Eli, he had brought them back together, reminding them of the bonds that mattered most. Bonds not forged by missions, not written in military orders, but by trust, loyalty, and love. The seals stood a little taller, smiled a little wider, and felt the unspoken truth in their hearts. Through Marcus's son, they were stronger, united. A team, not just by mission but by family. And for Eli, holding that necklace close, the world felt full of promise. A promise that no matter what came next, he would never face it alone. Because Marcus Reed's legacy wasn't gone. It lived on, in him, in these 5 men, and in every choice they made to honor a father's love. The trident glinted in the sunlight as Eli swung it around his neck. And for the first time, the boy didn't feel the absence of his father. He felt the presence of something greater. Home, family, legacy.